All right, on today's episode, we're going to go ahead and use the NBA playoffs as a backdrop for a discussion around what the Brooklyn Nets have tried to do over the last 3 years, whether or not it is a failing method of winning a championship, and how much responsibility Kevin Durant holds going forward as Brooklyn tries to reclamate their championship road. And that's all coming up right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yo. All right, welcome into the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the off-season Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Adam Marber, covering the New York Football Giants over on the One Giant podcast. He's Doug Norrie, owner-operator, DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings, DraftKings, FanDuel. He's got you covered. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms.
Okay, so we finished off part one talking about, how to approach Kevin Durant with this thing and where that lands. I think there's another piece that factors in here, and this is where the Nets probably are just pot committed to just having to sign Kyrie to the 5 years, right? And the reason is actually not Kevin Durant, because I think, just to go back to what you said yesterday, I think we already know how that's going to work. These guys are definitely tight. Like, that's the level of friendship we don't know. All we need to know is they're like really good basketball friends, and
they have a handshake. So
they have a great handshake. Yeah. That one of my buddies actually tried to do that to me the other day, and I kind of screwed it up.
Did you push him away? Did you shove him? Say, get out of here.
He was joking. He was joking around, but I was like the total idiot that just didn't get what he was doing at first. So anyway, but let's just call them basketball buddies, and that's really all that matters. But I think they're actually, like, however much you can have real good friends here, it seems like that's the case. They, want to do IG lives together, and KD was adamant in his support all year of Kyrie around Kyrie's decisions around the vaccine. Like, there was lots of chances that this could have gone wrong, and it just didn't. It seems on an emotional level, right down to Kyrie's comments at the end of the season, where he groups himself and Kevin Durant together as part of the organization going forward. So I think that, like, from that standpoint, it's as close as you can get basketball-wise, and maybe even friendship-wise when it comes to this stuff. I think that thing that actually makes it easier is what we talked about yesterday with Ben Simmons, because you already know almost with certainty that, like, he is coming back here because of this contract, and because I just don't. If you want to talk about a guy you can't trade for, who is trading for Ben Simmons? He didn't play. He sat out the whole year, and it didn't seem to be injury related at all. So if you go with him and say, we have him now. Like, even if we wanted to get rid of him, I don't even know we could go pennies on the dollar with this thing. Like,
well, this, by the way, is go ahead.
And this is only for context. Ben Simmons, just because we didn't mention this before, Ben Simmons is under contract through 2024, 2025, one less year than Kevin Durant.
Yep.
Like, so it's not like he's an expiring or has a player option in here. He's just under contract for the next 3 years. And Kevin Durant is under contract for the next 4 years. It's almost because you have that contract on the books that you just have to bring Kyrie back. Because it's like, what are we going to do? We have this other thing that we're never going to get rid of, even if we wanted to, short of him just saying he's retiring from basketball because he can't play anymore. Like, short of something like that, you probably just have to go back into the room with Kyrie and say, maybe try to put any incentive you can on it. Right? To say, hey, we need certain commitments here. I don't think that would matter with him too much, but
sure, I'm committed. Great.
But it's almost because you have Simmons now. Like, I think if it was like Harden expiring and Irving expiring and it was all blowing up at the end, it might be easier to walk away from two of those guys and sell Durant on the sort of like mini, reset rebuild. Sure. But because you have another contract that you can't do anything with, what are you going to sell it? Say, that's going to be you and Ben. Well, okay, how do I buy into that? Like, that's arguably worse.
Well, and just on that point alone, I think this is when we talk about, because we get to Kevin Durant quotes here, but since you brought it up about unrelated to Kevin Durant, it's like you make this, you bring in Ben Simmons, you understand the circumstances around him, but because of now, whether it's messaging coming from Ben's camp, whether it's coming from the Nets camp, the perception that at some point Ben Simmons was going to play for Brooklyn this year, which you and I talked about a lot, saying, as referring to it as in, don't bother talking about it because nothing's happening until it happens. You know, if at the time of the trade, it was kind of represented as we'll see Ben Simmons in the off season and he's a part of that plan going forward, then it would feel differently maybe about what his trade value could be, what his market could look like. But because I think you were trying to dance on both sides of the line here and say, well, we're getting rid of James Harden, but we're bringing back in a guy that if he can get back on the court, obviously we still feel like we're keeping our window open. I said at the time, this was about the future as much as it was about the present moment. And I guess the battle of PR, right? The battle of the media. The perception was you were still keeping yourself in a viable chance to win a championship this year, which I don't think was accurate, but that's what you did. And that actually diminishes whatever Ben Simmons' value could be this offseason.
And by the way, if they had said that right after the trade, they said, hey, we're trading for Ben Simmons, we'll see him next year, they would have, Sean Marks might have just been fired on the spot, right?
100%.
So like, and I know you know that, but now that we look back in the context of him not having played, yes, the way to retain his trade value, well, the best way to get his trade value up is to have him come back and play awesome. Like, that's actually the really the only saving trade value at this point is for having him come back, play awesome, and it has to be basically for a whole year. We can't be like 1 or 2 months of this thing. It needs to be a whole year of very consistent basketball play. At which point you might just have a championship level team again, because that's kind of exactly what they need.
And that's also to the point, if we to wrap up on the Ben Simmons element and this around this decision-making process, is when you said it yesterday too, in theory, these three players, Ben Simmons, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant, together with a supporting cast that could consist of Seth Curry and Joe Harris coming back from his injury, and maybe Bruce Brown if you can retain him, and a couple other spare parts and draft picks and the young rookies, by the way, that could be more valuable to this team next year than they were this year, certainly. We're right back in it, right? And that I think is as much a part of the equation as anything as well. It's not just about, even if Kevin Durant said, hey, you want to move off of Kyrie Irving, I get it. You would still have to have this very clear, which I'm sure they would, path of now, how do we bring in enough talent? And I can paint that picture a few different ways and say it could work for you. But the second that you acknowledge that if, as we said before, if everyone is healthy and on the court playing, well, this team is right back in the mix for being one of the championship odds favorites next season, and that's hard to walk away from in any capacity.
Yes, and in that standpoint, I do actually think a part where, they let Kyrie. Well, here's the other thing. There's a chance too. Like if they said, hey, we're not going to sign you. This is other funny thing we've talked about earlier is that they could say, hey, we're not resigning to a contract, and he's like, cool, I'll opt into this this player option. Right.
Yeah, but that's fine though. But I think that's fine though. That's like that. That's okay. Opt into it, because that means we have 1 year here. If Ben Simmons is really healthy and Kevin Durant's playing great and you're fully committed because you want the big money, what if we go win a championship? That then opens up a whole different set of doors where you go, we've checked this box about winning a championship. You can, one, be super satisfied to give Kyrie a whole bunch of money and say, yeah, it's on the arm. We got the chip that we wanted. Or to make a more aggressive stance around what you want to do organizationally for the future and feel a little bit of relief because you did accomplish that piece.
It's funny. You almost never want players to opt into their player option because it means that they are not worth it. Like almost I'm sure there's some examples out there of this not being the case, but my guess is something like 9 times out of 10, a player opting into the player option is like, oh, damn it, because like, it means that they're just not worth it on the open market now, because if otherwise they would just they decline it and they just go get paid more. This might be like one of those very few scenarios where the team actually, from what you said, wouldn't mind this, right? Because let's put everyone on the hot seat a little bit. Like let's have it be a commitment kind of thing. And if it all works out, not even works out championship wise, because only one team gets to win the championship. It can't all be based on that, right? Like you only get one championship. There's context, injuries, who knows? It can't all be tied to championships. There's just not enough to go around. And so, but if we get a full season of basketball or a best foot forward to play a full season of basketball, and we are able to stay out of the controversy mire, and it all looks good and happy and fun, and it looks like we can really envision this kind of thing happening for the long term, because again, we have these 2 other guys under contract for the next 2 years following this one. This might be the scenario where the Nets are crossing their fingers to do it. He's not going to, because he just signed his first agent. Like Kyrie it's his shoot.
It's really hard to slide the opt-in papers across the table. That's why you sign an agent. You say, I need you it's a 36.6 million. The paperwork's all here, but I do need you to carry it over to the office.
Yeah, I'm not saying he just signed an agent to get someone paid, by the way, either. Like, it's just not that. But like, you
No,
usually sign an agent when you are
a big negotiation. Yeah.
Or when you really need a negotiation, because like James Harden doesn't really need an agent, because James Harden's like, it's the max or bust. So why pay someone else 10% when I can just say max? Right. Max, please. Right? I can just go I can pay someone a few $1,000s to study the CBA and just to tell me what the max they can offer me is. And then I just go and hand that number to them and say, that's what it is, because that's what it's going to be for everybody. You might need an agent when you are, needing to maybe negotiate a little bit more, and you are needing to have a maybe different conversation than you were going to have before. I'm not saying that's why he did it, but no. I do think there's clearly going to be have to be some negotiation here. And honestly, he said it himself. I don't even know why I'm guessing at this. He said it himself. He said, I'm going to resign here. So I kind of walk some of this back, because he said in his final press conference, I'm resigning here. Right.
That's all good though, because I've heard Kyrie Irving apologize for a lot of things on the back end, such as saying like, well, I said I'm resigning here. What I meant was I'd really like to resign here. And I think in this instance, it is fairly straightforward about it. But this is less about what are they going to do and what should they do. And that's a part of it here. That's why coming up in a second, I want to talk about what Kevin Durant should be doing here. It probably should have been doing over the last 3 seasons for Brooklyn. Get into some of his comments in the post game that I think really show the contrast to how Kyrie Irving communicates versus how Kevin Durant represents it. And let's relitigate just for a hair, just for a moment, why the Brooklyn Nets now have Ben Simmons on their roster and if Kevin Durant is responsible for that. Before we do, we tell you about our friends over at Built Bar, because when you're having conversations like this, it means you're not in the playoffs, and that's a problem. So you're going to need a little boost of protein to make your way through. We know, that Built Bar is, of course, that protein-packed bar that tastes great and is covered in 100% real chocolate without any of those nasty additives. We also know that they give you those first-of-their-kind puffs, which is a protein-infused marshmallow. Absolutely delicious. Also covered in 100% real chocolate. Get you in on those stats. 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams of net carbs, and of course, 17 grams of protein. You compare that to those nasty candy bars with over 30 grams of sugar and 240 calories. Why bother? Tastes delicious, good for you, protein boost. You hit the website where you get coconut almond, and of course, white chocolate, cookies, and cream. And while you're over there on built.com, you can use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off on your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. So this may be a little bit too much of a examination of personality, but there are 2 parts to this. First, the post-game comments. And I will clarify one thing from a couple episodes ago. We talked about Kyrie. There were a lot of things, and we said it then, that resonated as being earnest that Kyrie said. The problem is he always seems to balance it with statements or commentary that you go, well, that one rubbed me the wrong way. A lot of it was about wanting to get on the right track. Things didn't work out. Maybe not the level of responsibility that you want to hear from him. But on the other side of it, when Kevin Durant was asked about how the organization moves forward and if he is involved actively in the decision-making process, some of the things that he said, mostly verbatim here, slight paraphrase, this is my list of guys, when he's talking with Sean Marks about what he wants to see happen. Sean Marks will hit me like, Goran is interested. What do you think? And I contacted him. That's how Kevin Durant described that scenario going out, picking up Goran off the buyout market. That's always who I've been since I got here. I've never had control. I didn't want it. And he went on to say, there are people that have those jobs inside of organizations. It would be disrespectful for me to act like I'm better suited, more knowledgeable, or more capable of doing their jobs. How can you be, even just from a speaking standpoint, how can you be Kyrie Irving and say what you say when you know this is what Kevin Durant is going to come out and communicate, and you literally contradict everything about the way he thinks a player and organization should communicate, even if it's just for the public? You still can't be on the same page with Kevin Durant. It's insane.
I was going to say, like, even if that was a lie, which I don't think it is, I think Kevin Durant is a very honest guy. Like, he just is an honest and earnest dude. All of his quotes would point it that way. Does he like to mix it up with fans at times? I think it's just having fun. Like, it's usually seems just in, kind of just having fun, anti-troll. I mean, he obviously went after Barkley the other day when Barkley came after him. Most of this is the theater around being an entertainer, right? I think that's like mostly just, it's totally harmless, and that's just what it is. And this comment, even if it was a lie, which it's not, is still the right thing to say because it's just like, hey, just lie, say, hey, they're going to do whatever they're going to do. Right. And if you disagree with it later, then say something. But when you insert yourself as part of the conversation as being, the manager or the coach, and it's like unbelievable after making the mistake the first time that he made the mistake the second time. Again, we talked about this the other day. It's only in the context of the other things that this thing is like, what? Right?
Yeah.
Like, and maybe it's just that no one else says it. So all this stuff is like, yes, you can point to this other dude that just kind of understands the right ways to at least say and think around this stuff about what it should mean organizationally on a forward facing nature, because you can just say something that sounds good. That doesn't have to be it doesn't all have to be truth and virtue. And it doesn't mean you're a liar. And it doesn't mean you're a liar, but like, it's just like, hey, this is just the right thing to say here. Sean Marks has got it. I trust them. I trust Steve Nash. They can just do whatever they want, right? Like, I don't have to even totally believe it, but I trust Sean Marks. I trust Steve Nash. I trust Kevin Durant. I'm here for the long haul. If they want me, whatever, right? Like, it doesn't seem that hard to say that. And it only seems to make it harder when you say things that are not that. And he beats his own drummer. So I get, whatever, but it is funny when it's like, you probably save everyone a little bit of a headache by just saying it this other way.
Yeah, 100%. I want to get to Sean Marks here too, but that like when you go to a party and someone invites you over, the food's lousy, the drinks weren't that good, and the company was terrible. When you leave, you go, "Hey, thanks so much for having me over. Great, good times." Instead of saying, "Let me break down the things I didn't enjoy about this experience, just, going forward in case you think about having me back again." Like, why do it? Why damage your relationship?
Next time I'll help plan the party.
Yeah, maybe what? Maybe we don't do it here next time. No, I'm not saying it smells weird.
Next time we both manage the party planning and like we're just both part of it.
It's great stuff. Yeah, but it's like, why damage the perception of whatever for the sake of making some type of statement you think is going to land with somebody, and it doesn't. It never does. It never goes the right way. It never comes across as, I was just giving you positive criticism. I wasn't saying it was a bad time. And to that end though too, the other thing that I think happens here, and we're in the weeds with these elements of what makes up these superstars, but I think Kevin Durant in some ways is like, I kind of like having Kyrie because Kyrie kind of says a lot of stuff a lot of times that kind of goes ahead and keeps him in the spotlight. And we know this from Kevin Durant's career. He wants to just play basketball. And whether or not there is literally a circus outside his door or inside his house, he's sitting on the couch in a blanket being like, yeah, I guess so. Might be getting crazy out there, but I got a cup of hot cocoa. I'm watching my stories and I'm feeling pretty good. Like, I think that that's also an element of this where Kevin Durant is like, dude, like Kyrie's my cover. Kyrie is so that I don't have to deal with some of this stuff sometimes. And maybe to that extent, maybe he is a little bit of Kevin Durant's mouthpiece of being like, yeah, we're all going to get together and figure this thing out. And that's how Kevin Durant really feels. But he doesn't want to be the face of that because he dealt with that for a long time. And we know how that felt when he left from OKC. That was a hard time for Kevin Durant. He's spoken about that. So now he has a guy that goes ahead and takes care of some of that dirty work.
Or he just doesn't care, right? Like he played, and it's funny too, because he's played with like two sort of totally opposite kind of public guys. Like Steph Curry is totally the opposite of Kyrie. I mean, not in terms of basketball, but in terms of, beloved star of a city. And, he was, some people want to, and this is nothing, this is new. This has been litigated a million times, but like there's speculation that Kevin Durant didn't like that it was always going to be Stephen Curry's his team and the Warriors, and he was never and he wanted to go do something else. So I think that's a good point too around Kevin Durant's just overall psyche around this, not psyche, like his own overall feelings around the situation is like, yeah, this is just kind of like the anti-Steph thing, and it's all a little trolly, and it's not perfectly crafted, and it's not this perfectly crafted message, and it doesn't need to be, because this is just more fun, and it's just more fun to be ourselves, and if we're ourselves are a little left to center, right to center, like that's better because it's more fun. And in the end, I just like playing basketball with Kyrie Irving a lot because I really respect the way he plays, and he's, an artist when it comes to basketball skills. And if that's just going to be the case, then maybe it's just as simple as that. And maybe it just is as simple as that. Like, we don't need to actually analyze too far deep into like why Kevin Durant would like this kind of situation. Maybe it's just very clear along those lines.
And let's keep it then here in a moment. I'm gonna take a breath is what I'm gonna need to do.
Oh,
And then
you take a breath. Take a breath.
Okay.
Let me hit you up with a little bet online here. We'll close this thing off about what the Nets should do around Kyrie Irving. BetOnline.net, your number one source for all of your betting stats and sports info. We talked about it yesterday. I got to remind everyone. BetOnline threw up the odds. Well, and some people did throw up when they threw up these odds. Threw up the odds around where if Kyrie Irving did not land with the Brooklyn Nets this offseason, which team was the favorite to sign him here. The odds were a little bit all over the place, but what was universal was it did not seem like a lot of other fan bases wanted him to do. A lot of fan bases wanted to make bets just to maybe see if Kyrie Irving could stay on the Nets. Like that's where their hard-earned money would go. BetOnline.net's got you covered for this kind of stuff and more. Their number one source for all that betting stats, all that info, MLB, NBA, NHL, esports, foreign leagues. It's all there on BetOnline.net. Head on over to the website. You can learn about all the different trends, all the betting action. Bet online, where the game starts.
Okay, so the last component, I think, to this discussion around Kyrie Irving and what the Nets will do versus maybe what they should do this offseason is, of course, Sean Marks as the GM. And I did think it was worth, noting. We talk about, well, if Ben Simmons had just played, maybe the perception of things would be different right now going into next season, going into the offseason. But at the time that you're sitting there, and by the way, this is, again, where if they're lockstep, there was going to be a divide between Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. It maybe would have come around his availability. Now, what's interesting is we said, if you're going to take a stance as the Brooklyn Nets did at the start of the year with Kyrie Irving saying no part-time, only full-time, and then as things start to break down on the roster, they adjust, and we know how that all plays out. But that passed through the Kevin Durant filter. So to your point about Kevin Durant just kind of like, yeah, it's all just going on. I'm here to play basketball. Maybe it goes every way. Like he's like, organization does what they want to do. Kyrie does what he wants to do. I'm not going to tell anybody what they have to do to make me happy. And it's all just kind of occurring around me. But again, I'll make the case that could still be a bit of an issue potentially because Kyrie is not available. You're worried about your chances for this year. So you make the choice. We're going to go get James Harden. Now, at the time, you and I agreed that has to pass the sniff test of Kevin Durant. He's played with him before. He likes him. But if Kevin Durant was on board with that move, then it's not culpable, but he's responsible, right? He's a part of that process because everything before that is Sean Marks building up an organization, getting these viable pieces. And this is what I said in yesterday's episode of, hey, trust me, Kevin Durant, I can put the pieces in place around you. And by the way, I got rid of a lot of those pieces to make this happen. And the only one I'm really caring about in all of this is Jared Allen. Doesn't mean that he's a superstar forever player, but when he signs a $100 million extension, and that's a big number, it's not as big as the numbers that you're signing these guys for on this current roster. Do you think that at the time of that, is that Kevin Durant saying like, hey, fine, we're going to be without Kyrie, but we need to do something to make sure that we can get through this? Or is that Sean Marks pushing the panic button around, I've gone pot committed on the super team, on winning championships, and we're in year 3. And at some point, my neck is a little bit on the line here because wrong, I think, is the perception that Sean Marks has gone from being one of the better GMs in the league to apparently a bumbling idiot who can't find a hole in the wall.
Okay, so I'm going to actually compare this trade to the Simmons trade, and you're going to see why. I'm going to say that I don't think anyone's culpable in the James Harden trade. I think that is like a total no-brainer. I'm only going back to two different contexts. One, at the time, it was like no problem. I don't think Sean Marks needed to even think about it. They gave up at the time. They gave up, in my mind, very little. I know Jared Allen became Jared Allen, but at the time they gave up what I thought to be not that much to get like one of the very best players in basketball. And you do that every single time. I don't think if anything, LeVert looks like a worse asset. Yes, Allen looks better, but LeVert doesn't look like nearly the same. Right. Like doesn't look like nearly the same asset. And I think everyone is culpable, but I also think that there's a world where like we came very close to being like that was not a home run, that was a grand slam. Because if without the injuries, I think that they just stomp everybody into the playoff, into the thing. So, and we had just enough of a sample size to be like, hey, dude, that actually was going to work. Like these guys. Well, hold on. I'm just going to now compare it to the Ben Simmons trade. With the Ben Simmons trade, where it's different, where I think I don't even think we're needing to wait and see. I think we already know that this is already at best like a C, and there's like a chance it goes to an F minus. But I think in that scenario, for whatever reason, the Nets did not have all the relevant information that was needed to make that trade. And there might have been like a due diligence part of this that would have said, hey, Now that we actually have all the information, that information was relevant at the time.
Yeah.
Jared Allen becoming an all-star isn't like relevant at the time of the trade. Karis LeVert's value isn't relevant. It's only relevant to what he is at the moment, right? And man, there's some other stuff. But the Ben Simmons trade, and maybe I'm not answering your question, but the Ben Simmons trade is like, hey, it's looking now like the Nets made a trade without having all the right info. I think the Nets had all the right info at the James Harden trade, and it just kind of didn't work out.
Yeah, that's fair.
There's a Simmons trade where it's clearly not working out, and they might have let a couple other pieces slip through here where it was like, hey, we wish we had known a little bit more about what was going on with this guy, and it's maybe looking like we didn't. And that's where I'm trying to paint it to say like I don't blame anyone for the Harden trade at all, because I think it was totally correct.
Yeah. So here's the couple of quick things is one, just that this is a side note that I had a thought about earlier today when I was talking with some of the guys on the network. Remember those assets to the Rockets get a lot better after the Nets get knocked out in the first round of the playoffs and finish up a 7th seed. So just in terms of those assets, they actually get a lot prettier for Houston, which was a funny little footnote to this process. But the one disagreement I would say is you're right about maybe not having the right information on Ben Simmons, and I have a question there. But when it comes to Jared Allen, while at the time if you didn't know that he could become an all-star or play at that level, the Nets should have known that, right? Like the Nets should have known what the maximum of his value was.
But the thing is, you're never getting James Harden for nothing. So like,
no, that I understand. No,
you
100%.
have to give up something,
100%.
and the something has to be kind of good. Like the fact that they weren't even at that level when they made the trade is just more of a testament that the trade was great. Like,
and by the way, it probably comes out in the wash to your point around, well, Karis LeVert turns out to look like that's going the totally opposite direction.
And you're never just being like, hey, here's a bag of balls and a 2nd round pick. You think we can grab James Harden? It's like, you have to give up something.
Yes. And that's less, my point on that is less around, because we talked about it at the time, in my heart of hearts, I had, and this is, I'm being retroactive in it because of the results a little bit. There was always this moment, as anyone listens to the podcast, where I love the young players. Now, that very small sample we got with Harden, say, hey, we can do this thing, and really gets me to my bigger question before we close out, and I'll ask about Kyrie one last time. Do you think that the Brooklyn Nets and Sean Marks should have then just said, James Harden, we're not trading you. We're also not going to re-sign you this offseason. You are going to walk away, but we're going to go ahead and live with the risk reward of, are you just going to sit out the rest of the season? Is that it? That's your option, or you'll end up playing, because Kyrie came back fairly quickly after the trade. Things got back on track there, and whether or not they would have won a championship this season, should the Brooklyn Nets have just said, hey, we're going to go with that? We know they got a couple of assets, obviously, a couple of draft picks from Philadelphia as well. They got Seth Curry. Drummond's not going to be a part of this team going forward. But would that have been the better route than getting into these murky Ben Simmons waters now? And then you would go into the offseason right now saying, James Harden is gone for Philly. We don't have Ben Simmons on this roster, but we also have a lot of money that we can put around if we retain Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant.
If there was any, I'll catch you in what I said before. If there was any question at the time of the trade that Ben Simmons was not going to be able to play, or if you were even a little sketched about it, right? Yep. Like, hey, we're getting a little conflicting messages. We haven't been able to talk to him as much as we want to. At that point, like, I think we all kind of assume those things happened. If those things did not happen, then yes, you have to go back to James Harden and say, hey, dude, like, we're not trading you. We can't trust this other thing. I'm sorry. We just have to make this work. Like, you have to be able to say it to him. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. If they were sold a bill of goods, or if something changed after the trade, that, the back flared up, or he went to ramp up and he was really hurt, he had a herniated disc, like, that stuff, then that's just kind of bad luck again. It was so many weird dominoes that I do feel like something was just missed here. Like, something was missed ahead of time. And that makes me think that's where I would say, if there's any question marks, you just can't do it. Like, you can't. Yep. James Harden, for whatever he has become and whatever he is now, he's still just too good. Like, he's too good to give up for a question mark. And if he just chooses to sit out, like, I don't know, maybe that was on the table, but so I think I would say in that second scenario where you do not have all the information around someone that you were going to have on their contract for a long time, like, you just can't do it. But that's, a little 20/20 hindsight probably.
And it's funny too, because you could almost, I think, apply that to the same thing when you traded for James Harden. Now, inside of this one window, you go, hey, we think we can win right now, and that's the goal here. Future be damned. Did the Nets have a certain understanding of, like, James Harden may not be long for here. He may be going somewhere else eventually. This could be a stop along his journey. And if it was, what would the hierarchy of your decision-making tree
And
be?
he and
Would that
he's
be
just
worth it?
still so
Because you
good.
could still win. Yeah.
He's still so good that I just like
You run
there's
the
just
risk.
it's just a different kind of guy. Like he's still like MVP-ish level James Harden at that time. So I think that you still just hold a second set of criteria. Ben Simmons was already like a possibly very damaged asset. Like anyway. Okay, let's finish this off.
Hold on.
Kyrie
Here's my
Irving.
last question. Yeah, my last question for to get out the door on here is now over a delicious 2-part episode that started with talking about NBA playoffs, and I knew I would get Doug on this journey with me. Not what will they do, but should the Brooklyn Nets be telling Kyrie Irving, pick up the player option or walk? It's your choice. Like, what do you think they should do for the best health of the franchise? Not about if Kevin Durant would come or go or stay. You have the roster you have, and Kyrie Irving has a choice to opt into a player option, and he wants the max deal. Should they do it?
Should they make him sign the player or say that we're not going to offer you a max deal? I'm just going to make sure I get very clear on this answer. So, okay, you're saying, should they not offer the max deal? Say we need you to opt into the player option, and we have a good feeling that you're with us for life, but there's just been a lot of weirdness. We can all agree. And I think that feels to me like the best option. Because I think that is, I don't think it's the most realistic option by a long shot, but that feels the best and cures a lot of question marks that you might have, right? And it's like, hey, you're still going to make $36 million a year. The contract is still going to be here for you. You are free to test the open waters. We would like to have you. And we do see you as part of the future, but we just have to agree at this point that it's now year 3 of this, and it's been pretty inconsistent for a lot of different reasons. And
help us clean the slate. Help us wipe this thing clean so we start out in a new year 1 with you, Kevin Durant, and Ben Simmons as the new core.
And again, it's not even necessarily, it's not championship related, and it's not any of that other stuff. It's just like, you got to give a little to take a little here. And if we're going through 3 years and you played 100 games and there was just a lot of other stuff that went on, that feels correct to me. And I'm sure it's just not going to work out that way. But this might, like I said, this might be one of those rare times where, like, someone picking up the player option. It's not Kyrie's best fan, but not by a long shot, for his best financial gains to pick up the player option. That's not lost on me. And I think there's a world where he doesn't really see himself maybe he does, because he said he caused them a lot of distractions. Like, he did say that in the press conference too. But
yeah, to be clear, if for all that we lambasted him around the press conference, like I said, there were these nuggets that he understands, at least, that it happened. To what level he feels he's responsible or culpable or etc., he does acknowledge it, and that's what I mean. Maybe this is a good opportunity if you take the positives out of that press conference, that he said that this is a family and we want to build this thing forward. We know what it's going to take. Then this is that first step. This is a little first step gesture. And then guess what? Next year, we're going to re-up you, and the money might be even a little bit better based on where the NBA cap and everything else goes, right? Just give us this one good faith gesture here, and we get to move forward with it. And
it's so funny. I actually do think there's I'll get out of the door on this. I think that there's, or you can respond to this if you want, but didn't want to make it seem like I was just going to take the last word here.
I'm going to talk and then we'll be done.
I do think there's funny. And I never, ever, and Adam knows this more than anybody. Like, I'll never, ever go into someone's pocket and say you shouldn't earn something. Like, Adam, I'm like this I'm probably to a default like this, or even around people that, people don't think should be making anything, right? Like, I will always default to, it is not my job to tell you how much money you can make. And I frankly get super pissed when I hear other people say it, even around rich people, poor people, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm saying that to say this next thing, that no one would reset his own sort of like narrative within the media and fan bases and stuff bet more than if Kyrie did something like this, right? Like, if he did this, I don't think he should. It's obviously way worse for him financially. I'm only speaking from a narrative point of view. This guy clearly is a total lightning rod for the media and for fans and for everybody else because of all the other stuff. If he were to do that, I almost think he would have like a 1-to-1 reset on the whole narrative behind him. I think it would actually shift immediately. I think people would say, whoa, he wants to show something here, and he knows that it's been a little weird or whatever. And and he's had a couple weird exits with other teams already. And like, I don't want that to be the, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I
want this to be my home. I said I wanted to be here. I want to come home to New Jersey, New York, New Jersey. I want to be a part of this, and you'll still make your big money. To your point, like this could buy you the back end of your career. Could be all goodwill based off of this one decision that you make.
By the way,
and he doesn't have to care about that, by the way, at all.
I tried to, as much as I could, take the money piece out of that. Like no one in the world is passing up, $200 million.
And you're right.
I'm not asking him to do that. All I'm saying is that this is the effect this would have. The effect that this would have would be this other thing, which I think would frankly change the landscape of his career.
And there would not be a zero impact on the Nets from the money that's obligated to Ben, that's obligated to him, the money that still is owed to Joe Harris, and what that would mean going forward. All these things are relative. And again, that decision, money completely aside, it would be very positive for him. And then from an organizational standpoint, it could also help them shift their way through and give themselves kind of this leap year as far as how they can restructure the organization. What a fascinating conversation I brought today. Good Lord.
Buddy, it was supposed to be one part. We made it two. It was too good. we were 20 minutes in. I said, this baby's a two-parter. We're not getting out of here in 30 to 40 minutes. No chance. That was a good one, man. I think like this kind of stuff, this is what I mean about basketball. It's fascinating. This offseason is going to be a fascinating one in general for the Brooklyn Nets. We're going to get all Adams trades, like we said at the top, for sure. We'll do draft coverage. We're doing draft coverage as well. We'll still keep talking about how the NBA landscape shifts out in terms of the playoffs because we're still watching hoops. In the meantime, make sure you like and subscribe over on Locked On Nets. And I got to say one thing real quick. We always say we're so thankful we had big numbers at the end of the season. Like our numbers were really awesome when the season was over. Like our first day out of the season, still good. We're like, it just really, puts wind in our sails because we just know we're going to be talking all off season. And it's just great to know other people are going to be along for the ride. So make sure you like and subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast, and make sure you subscribe over on the Locked On Nets YouTube channel.
Life gives you plenty of time to do whatever you want to do if you stay in the present moment. Deepak Chopra.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We will be back again tomorrow. Scratch that. Next week, talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.